Welcome to another episode of Keeping It Real, a weekly podcast to inform our Dallas residents about the City of Dallas services, events, and initiatives. Thank you for joining us today. My guests today are Andrea Gilles, Assistant Director of Planning and Urban Design, and Lawrence Agu III, Chief Planner. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
In today's episode, we want to have a conversation about the all-important Foward Dallas. And so why don't we just jump right in? Can one of you or both of you describe or tell me what is a comprehensive plan and how will it be used?
Well, I'll take a first stab at that. We're really excited to be here talking about Foward Dallas. It is officially the Foward Dallas Comprehensive Land Use Plan update. We do have a Foward Dallas plan in the city that was adopted in 2006. This is its update. In its simplest terms, a comprehensive plan is thinking about and having conversations about how and where the city grows. Where are we going to accommodate more housing? Where do we want to focus on our new employment centers? Or do we have employment centers that maybe need some additional help? How are we going to think about that infrastructure and investment in those areas? And it's not just about development. It's also about, how do we think about preserving open spaces or preserving areas that we don't want to see change? So, and I think really one of the most important pieces of Foward Dallas and a comprehensive plan is that it's an opportunity to have a conversation citywide. We often do a lot of planning either by areas or neighborhoods, and it's rare that we get to actually have those conversations on a citywide level. We're not just thinking about what happens in this smaller area of the city. We're thinking about, yes, what happens in that smaller area, but then how it impacts the city as a whole. So, and really making sure that we have those collaborative conversations with the community. One of the things is we know that we're going to grow exponentially over the next couple of decades. We have got to plan for that growth. So how are we managing it? Where are we putting people? Where are we housing people? Where are people working? And then we have to make sure that all of those things are connected. And this is an opportunity to have those conversations, with residents, with business owners, with institutions, with agencies, with the entire city. Anyone who wants to be involved in this process. So we're really excited about that.
Right. And I think the unique thing with this particular comp plan is it's focused on land use. So typically in the cities throughout the country, they focus comp plans on, infrastructure, green development, parks, but this one's focused just on land use, which makes it very easy for us to kind of focus what the intent for the takeaway is with this particular plan.
Yeah, and one of the benefits is, so right now, how Dallas has sort of been handling land use over the past years is we've been doing it plan by plan, neighborhood by neighborhood. So in all of its years, it's been doing planning and land use planning. We have maybe a little over half of the city planned. And by the time you get to that half of the city, you have some plans that are 20 years old, right? And already need to be updated. This is an opportunity to get the entire city under the guidance of land use. And why that's important is because land use guides zoning. So one of the key intersections is having this guidance for zoning that comes before the city. So it's not only a benefit to decision makers, so elected officials, our city plan commission, our appointed officials, but also residents, so that all residents in the city can have some type of development guidance that they can fall back on too. When a zoning case comes to city council and they're making these important decisions, yes, city council has the plan as a guide, but residents too. They can come down and say, this isn't what my plan says. This isn't what the citywide plan says. Or we actually want this. This is what we plan for. We want you to recommend this to be approved.
Well, listen, it sounds like this is a very important document to our residents and I think to our council members as policymakers. And so I know one of our bigger conversations the last several years, I'd say, has really been about equity. And the plans that we've evolved to develop, update, and or create from housing to economic development to transportation to our arts plan. Now Foward Dallas comes. Talk to me about how this plan is going to tackle the issue and address equity from within it.
Sure. We've had a lot of conversations. I'm sure you've heard throughout the years that there have been a lot of racist policies in zoning and land use throughout the years that we've tried to deal in some piecemeal ways here and there. Through Foward Dallas, we want to take some of those head on. What we can do from a land use and zoning perspective to really bring those issues to the forefront and have honest discussions about that. And one of the ways that we're doing that through Foward Dallas is really to focus on, even before we get to land use and zoning recommendations, making sure that we have equitable community engagement and that we are emphasizing and focusing on communities that haven't necessarily been traditionally put to the forefront of those discussions. And making sure that we are going out to those communities, meeting them where they're at and having those conversations. And not just having the conversations, but hearing it, listening to it, and then putting steps in place that respond to what we're hearing. So, when Foward Dallas kicked off in 2021, part of the scope was to just kind of move right into some of the priorities and guiding principles. We paused for a minute and said, I think we need to have more community engagement. We need to hear from the community what some of the key themes are. And before we as planners, come up with what those guiding principles might be, because sometimes they don't match. Or we all have the same mix, but not necessarily the order of the priority. So, what we've heard loud and clear is that past plans haven't implemented what the community has said are their priorities. We need to make sure that Foward Dallas is looking at how we implement those recommendations. One of the major things that is coming up through this plan is environmental justice. We have a lot of incompatible land uses. Specifically, when we say incompatible land uses, the one we think of most often is residential right next to industrial. There's a lot of legacy as to why that occurred. And we need to work on fixing some of that, and really have conversations and honest conversations with the community and have Foward Dallas prioritize that issue. Because it doesn't go away, right? You know this. It keeps coming up at City Council. It keeps coming up at City Plan Commission, these incompatible land use issues. We've got to tackle that head on.
Well, listen, and that sounds easy.
Yeah.
And I think as we've talked, particularly leading up to some of what I believe are going to be some of those tough conversations around that incompatible use. Mm-hmm. When you've got a neighborhood right in the middle of an industrial area, the question becomes, going forward, kind of how does that ever going to make sense? And what do you do about that? And so tell me how you're going to actually, what should people expect? It's not going to be overnight. No. If you've got industrial or commercial right up on top of you and you happen to be in a residential place, kind of tell me what that looks like the day after this plan is approved, and just kind of what some of those pain points are going to continue to be. Just give me some thoughts so that at least someone listening won't think that this plan is going to solve decades of zoning that is just in land use that has not been done in a manner befitting.
And that's a really good point, because Lawrence and I talk about this all the time about managing expectations. This is a long-range plan. So land use is long range, right? It's decade, it's 10 years, it's 20 years. But in planning urban design, we also have the zoning component. So one of the things, so this plan gets adopted. Then next day, what we have to start working toward is where we identified those zoning inconsistencies. So now we're going to have this land use guidance, this future longer term land use guidance. There are going to be some areas that we're going to look through this plan that we say, you know what? These areas need to be rezoned. We need to go out and follow up what we said we were going to do in this plan from a land use perspective and go in and start working on that rezoning. The equity issue is that we need to have conversations about prioritizing those areas that the zoning hasn't been addressed. Either one, because they were annexed in and we never went in as a city and rezoned them to a proper zoning, or because back in the day, if you had an industrial zone, you could do all the way from single-family residential, you could do all the way from a park all the way up to the heaviest of industrial, all in that one zoning category. And we've never gone back in, or rarely gone back in once a plan has been done and rezoned. We also need to be working very collaboratively, which we've emphasized through this process, of our partner departments, different departments in the city that have more short-term tools to address some of the issues that are happening today, tomorrow, next week, and next month that we can't necessarily address through land use and zoning. But if we're building those partnerships and identifying the areas in the city that most need zoning interventions, land use interventions, and then some of that other short-term investment, we can start layering on some of those tools to better support those communities.
Well, Lawrence, how can people get involved in this process to make sure that they're getting the type of information they need and they understand what the future looks like, so to speak?
Right. So we have a plethora of different ways to get involved with Foward Dallas. So if you want to come in person to our workshops, we have in-person workshops throughout the city. We actually have one today at Thurgood Marshall Neighborhood Park down by the D3 area. So that's one place to actually go and provide your comments on the place type map, the future land use map that we're developing. During those workshops, you can also provide comments in terms of what are we defining, how are we defining each of these specific land uses in your communities. If you don't have the ability to come in person, we've also set up a virtual workshop, which does the same type of guidance through the place type, the workshops, also through identifying the definitions of those particular place types, and people can provide comments on the map in terms of what they like, what they don't like, and others can kind of add on to those comments as well. If you can't do either of those, our team is also available in terms of by phone, because we know people can't access some of the content because of visual impairments. You can call us at 214-671-8900 and talk to one of our planners, and we can basically set up a meeting with your community to be able to set up a workshop and just a discussion about what is Foward Dallas, because we know that not everybody has an understanding of what Foward Dallas is. So although we're several years into this plan, we know that there are still people who don't really understand the process. So we're still here to kind of touch base with anybody who wants to reach out to us related to what Foward Dallas is.
Well, listen, let me ask this. How engaged has the community been in this? What have you seen so far? Is the engagement what you had hoped and expected? Is it more than? Tell me what else we can be doing to get more people pulled into this if, in fact, we're not hitting our mark at this point.
I'll kind of maybe start and you probably kind of touch base. So I think related to land use, a lot of people can see that connection between where they live and what is being designated as what they live. So we've heard a lot of feedback related to people starting to understand why and where these locations and these land uses are being designated. But also, too, we also know that not everybody is attuned to land use in the city. Probably not the most glamorous kind of topic in the city, but it's still an important topic for everybody to be plugged into. So although we are getting a lot of feedback, hundreds and actually thousands of comments from the virtual means, thousands in person, we still know that we're still trying to make sure that everybody knows what's happening in the city. So we're continually trying to push, make sure that our metrics related to the land use engagement is still relative and connection with the demographic in the city.
Well, and I would say, too, I think it helps now that we have a very initial draft future land use map out. So up to this point, we've been doing a lot of sort of abstract discussions about, your priorities, what land use is, doing a lot of educational pieces, because Dallas doesn't have a long foundation of citywide land use. And so there's been a lot of need for that educational piece. So now that we have a map out for people, they can actually drill down and see what that map says, what this land use, what the proposed future for this area looks like. I think we're getting a lot more input and feedback on that map. Like, yeah, you got it right. You know what? This makes a lot of sense. Yes, we do want this. Or, no, that's not my community. That's not how I would describe this place here. And that's the kind of feedback that we want to hear, both the positive and the negative, because we're not going to get it right on the first try. So we need the community's input right now. And so that's why we're pushing out as many channels as we can to get as many people involved.
Well, again, the more engagement, the better. That's one of our ease of our city engagement. So I know you and your team are doing a great job, the best you can to try to get folk to come out. Talk to me real briefly about some of the plan's key themes and how did those themes evolve with the plan?
So I can touch on that. So again, 2 years ago when we started our initial engagement, we went out to the community and just asked kind of open-ended questions in terms of their issues, opportunities, and areas that they feel that we needed to kind of focus our engagement and our plan on. So from thousands of comments, our staff kind of reviewed, we analyzed it, and boiled those down into 6 kind of core themes that we have for Foward Dallas. Those are environmental justice, transit-oriented development and connectivity, urban design, rural, agricultural, and greenfield development, housing accessibility, and environmental justice. So those are the 6 kind of buckets that we've kind of boiled down into the themes for the project. And those are all representative of what the community has told us in terms of what other issues, opportunities, and focuses that we need to have with this plan. And the key part of that is that we're going to be tailoring the land uses and the topics that come out from this plan around those themes. So that's going to be the tenet of that plan, and that's going to be showing the community that we have used and seen your comments, and then we're connecting that to how the plan is going to be implemented moving forward.
Wow. Speaking of implementation, how is it going to be implemented? Again, the city council was the community, loved this phrase, we don't want plans to just sit on the shelf. And one of the hallmarks, I believe, of my administration is once we've spent time with the community and council developing a plan, we're going to find a way to implement it. So tell me, what is the implementation strategy, and will this plan be implemented, and who needs to be held accountable for ensuring that it's going to be implemented?
Excellent question, and it is true. The biggest heartbreak of a planner is the planner that sits on a shelf and collects dust. So we all need to work toward implementation. It's all of our jobs, at every level of the city, within, City Hall, but then also the community as well. So that's part of the reason why we want to make this an accessible, manageable plan as well, so that the community can use it, that they don't take a look at this plan and just get overwhelmed and think I don't even know where to start. But we need to start chipping away at it. We will include, so part of this plan will include an implementation chapter. And we want to make sure that it is we don't want it to be a laundry list of everything that the city needs to do, everything that we've ever thought that the city should do in the kitchen sink. We want to make sure that these are very manageable action items for the next, very short term through the next 10 to 15 years. And they can change. They can evolve over time. But we want to make that clear who the responsible parties are and what kind of timeline we're looking at. And I think if we ensure that those action steps and how to implement this plan, whether it be through rezoning or whether it be through, we need some investment here. We need to include certain projects in the capital improvement program. That's a big piece of this as well. Land use drives certain kind of investment, and infrastructure goes hand in hand with that. So we want to be very clear about what those steps are so that we kind of all have our marching orders. We also want to establish a process where we're evaluating this plan on at least an annual basis. And so that we're going through this matrix and saying, this is what we've done. This is what we have accomplished. This is where we're lagging. This is what we might need to accomplish this, or remind everyone, hey, remember when we said we were going to do this? What do we need to get there? So as much as we can hold ourselves accountable with that respect and be transparent and evolve that matrix, that action step, I think will be really helpful for our implementation.
Yeah, I think speaking of who's going to be accountable for the plans, we're actually connecting with a technical review committee that's comprised of different departments in the city, different stakeholders outside of the city, including the county, DISDs, to be able to talk through the implementation steps that we're developing, to kind of see do these make sense and get feedback from them in terms of do these make sense for you to kind of implement after Foward Dallas? What timeline makes sense? What input should we tweak, and how should we modify this to make sense for you all after Foward Dallas is adopted? Because some of these topics, like environmental justice, they're outside of land use as well. It's like they have land use components, but there's some other pieces that deal with environmental justice outside of our department. So we want to make sure that we have partners who can kind of help us move this down the road for each implementation item in a way that's make sense for them too as well.
And that's a really good point, Lawrence, about the different departments in the Technical Advisory Committee, that we aren't making any recommendations in this plan that we're not getting buy-in from those that we need that partnership and that coordination on for implementation. So it's not planning and urban design coming up with its laundry list of what we think needs to happen.
Right.
If we're putting something in the plan, we want to make sure that anyone that may touch that item has buy-in it as well. And so ideally that's helping other departments, think about their priorities and what they need to consider as well in the upcoming years.
Well, listen, it's been a eye-opening and educating conversation. I will tell you, as a city manager, I never really had an appreciation for planners until, I met you, Andrea. Obviously, having worked with you in a previous life in San Antonio, you really proved to me how integral planners are in the way you go about it. And you, Lawrence, obviously, spending time with Andrea and your whole team and how we're approaching this work here in Dallas really makes me excited for, I think, something different that our community can expect. And I'm hopeful that the plan that you've worked and spent the time with them to help develop, as well as the rest of your team, will actually not sit on the shelf. It will actually do what is being requested of it, and folk will look at it and help guide the future of the city. So again, you two are sitting in those seats because you matter, and I appreciate your efforts. And so, Andrea, Lawrence, thank you for participating today and educating people on Foward Dallas. And come back and see me once, in fact, we adopt a plan and we can talk about implementation. So again, thank you again. I appreciate you appearing on my podcast.
Thank you,
I
TC.
appreciate it. Thank you so much.
We appreciate your support.
All right.